Do you feel like you suffer from a life unlived? Does it feel like every time you solve a problem, there's always another one right behind it? You might be wondering, when do you ever get to the point where you can just live your life? I struggled with this for years, and I even fell into depression twice because I couldn't seem to get my life where I wanted it to be. But I overcame it and have since enjoyed a very rich and rewarding life. And I can show you how to do the same. On today's podcast, with my co hosts Iulia and Nate, we're going to reveal what you really, really need to hear that's being drowned out by all the noise in your life.
And just know that if you would like the notes of this discussion, you can go in the description and you will find a podcast guide link. And there you will find the guides that we've made for other episodes as well.
All right. Well, let's dive into the first thing that I wanted to talk about here. And that's just being distracted by all the smaller problems that aren't really going to fulfill you once you solve them. We get fixated on this a lot of times and we think, well, if I can just solve this problem in my life, then everything's going to be fine. And solving problems are like pieces to a puzzle. Every time you find a new piece, it contributes to a clearer picture, a clearer vision, a clearer understanding of who you are and where you want to go, where you want to take your life. But I know for myself, I spent way too much on little problems. And I think even to the point where I felt like I'd rather focus on the smaller problems because if I can solve the smaller problems, then I don't have to face the big ones. And by solving the smaller ones, I get a little bit of a boost. And I think we need that sometimes. I think we need a win sometimes.
What's really a difference for you between a small problem and a big problem?
So there's a bit of a paradox here too. I think one of the big problems I was trying to solve was my self-worth. I had low self-esteem. I did not feel worthy, and that's the wrong problem to try to solve. At the same time, you have to figure out what's going on to really understand that and resolve it. So it's kind of weird. It's kind of like, yes, you absolutely need to solve that problem. It's just that the way that you're thinking about it is wrong because it's really not a problem. You're making it a problem when it's really not. But I don't know
What
anyone else who does that, who escapes that. There's maybe been one or two people I've ever met who didn't have a self-worth problem or didn't solve their self-worth problem.
what do you think the different categories you're mentioning? Solving the right problems. What are the categories of wrong problems that people usually get trapped in?
I think the need to accomplish or to achieve a goal. I think people think they put that out in front of themselves. It's like the carrot on a stick, and they go chasing that. And you'll. This is why, like, I'll give you some examples of people I knew, and nothing against joining the military. If you feel called to that service, like I think it's a very noble thing, and I'm very grateful that we have people who do that in this country and protect us. It's an amazing thing. A lot of people who I knew who were thinking of going into the service, like when I was in high school, and even myself, I had considered it. I almost signed up. I felt like going to the service and the people who I talked to who were thinking about it, and some people who actually did, that was going to make them someone. That was going to make them feel like they were someone. And I get it when you're that age, when you're young, like that, you don't really have a sense of who you are, so you're trying to figure it out. And for some people, that idea of doing that and wearing a uniform will make them someone. And I think there's so much more that you can look at and going into the service that you can focus on that will serve you so much better than that. But I think this idea of trying to be someone, and there's also the trying to find yourself and trying to find your way, and that's all valid too. But I think where people are way too focused on the destination, they
Mm.
fantasize about what they're going to be like, and what's it going to be like when everything is working out for them. And after years pass by and you solve some problems and some problems you can't seem to solve, and then you wonder about that, you go, okay, that seems out of reach now. And then you start to go into a state of despair, or you start to do what I call trying to leverage or trying to bargain with reality, bargain with the universe, and say, okay, I'll give up that part of my fantasy, but I want to hold on to this other one. I realize I'm not going to be a rock star, but maybe I just want to be able to play guitar and have enough time to do that. And people start bargaining with themselves or bargaining with life. Even it's in thinking Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich. There's a poem in there about, I didn't ask for all that I could ask in life. I'm paraphrasing it right now, but this idea, I'll ask for less, and then I realized at the end of my life, well, I got less because that's all I asked for. And so that bargaining is not something that we want to do either. I think the main thing is to not focus on the end result and the outcome. Let that be the adventure and the surprise. Focus on the process of becoming, focus on the process of doing, and then see what fruit that bears. Like I would have to say that when I started my YouTube journey, I didn't know where it was going to end up, but I did know that the reason I was doing it, the reason I was doing it is because I was trying to make a live teaching business where I did workshops live. And not only did that not work out, something better came about. But if I had fixated too much on that, which I did for a while, because the first time I tried to do a workshop after I had cultivated a following, it absolutely failed miserably. And so I thought I'm done. All my work has been all for naught. And then it's really surprised me when I realized that I could actually do trainings online and do much better doing it that way. And that's the way people wanted it, because that's how they were accessing my YouTube videos, was on a computer. So why would they not? That's the way they wanted the training. If I had not been able to sort of open up and realize that there was something else going on here, there was another possibility, I would have just quit and I would have moved on to something else, or maybe just given up on this whole idea that I could make an independent income and not have to work for someone else and all those things. So I think what people are doing a lot of times, they're focused on what's it going to be like when I solve this problem, and then they solve that problem, and it always feels good to solve a problem, but that good feeling doesn't last very long, because they realize, well, their life isn't really all that different, and they're not really all that different. It's not like the transformation is in the destination. The transformation is in the process of what you're doing. And so you can solve many, many problems, and not as you're changing and as you're growing, just like watching grass grow or paint dry. You're not really, if you focus too much on it from day to day or minute to minute, you're not going to notice it. But then a few years pass, and then you look back and you go, wow, okay, after having solved a lot of those problems, look how I've changed. And what am I doing now that I was doing differently?
But I feel like if you always focus just on the big problems, you do need to focus a little bit on the smaller ones, because you do need wins. If you only focus on a big one that's like long term and you feel like you have no success, that's kind of going to kill your motivation. So I think that there is definitely a space to solve smaller problems, because you need that little boost to see that you can solve them. You can make yourself better. You can make small changes in your life that will help you. So probably, and that's something that usually Nate is mentioning often in business, chunking down. You may have a big problem, and in order to really tackle it properly, you chunk it down, and then you do have success along the way. Because if you only look at it as a big problem that you chase, and it's going to take so long to get to the end result, I don't know, it sounds a little daunting to know that you do not have wins along the way.
So I'm not saying that. I'm not saying we shouldn't solve smaller problems. What I am saying is it's really important that you have a greater context in which to solve those problems. And I think people default to the context in which they're solving the problems is like a fantasy. It's very unrealistic, especially when you're young. You don't have a realistic perspective of you're more dazzled by what you see on social media, or whatever it is.
Would you say that me at 25, I'm considered very young?
Yes, absolutely. And so I think it's more
So I'm
about
dazzled right now.
it's more about understanding the greater context in which you're solving the smaller problems. So yes, when you think about, so I think this is I really like the idea of starting big and then working backwards. We call that downside planning or backwards planning. And so let's just start with, what does everyone want? Like, what can we say that absolutely everyone wants, that there's no way?
Happiness.
I don't necessarily agree with that, because I see, and so and I want to take it a step further too, to clarify, because it's easy to say that everybody wants happiness. But I think that not everybody does, in the sense as if you watch how people act, you watch their behavior, that's really what tells you the truth. So you can maybe say that there's some place deep down inside that they believe that they're trying to be happier. But I've seen some really miserable people who are really invested in justifying why they're so miserable. And a lot of that has to do with blame and resentment. And that's why blame and resentment is so toxic.
Mm.
I don't see those people engaging in blame and resentment as a means to make themselves happier. What I do think we all want, I think we all want fulfillment.
Yeah.
And I think that there are plenty of people who believe that being resentful and blaming other people will fulfill them in some way, especially if they can validate that and be proven right about that. And so it's like, finally, yes, I'm right. I remember working early on when I was a coach with someone, and she would basically, her thesis was nobody cares about her, even though she had a partner. They shared kids, and she tells me this whole story about how her partners, it was a lesbian couple, and they both had kids from other previous marriages. And she was saying how this whole story about her, how her wife had given all of her attention to her kids and not her or her kids. And so I just said, well, what does that mean to you? And she goes, it's proof that nobody cares about me. And she was so, like, in that moment, she was fulfilled. She was fulfilled in the sense of, like, I'm getting to tell you that I'm right and I'm validated. But of course, that fulfillment lasted a second. There's so much misery packed in that. So what I think we're all aiming at is fulfillment. We do something, and everything we do is based, what we say in NLP, as a positive intention.
Mhm.
And the idea is to fulfill that intention. There is no such thing as behaviors that are random. Everything has an intention, and of course we could lose consciousness of what that intention is, and that is what, like, we have these automatic bad habits. We don't know why we have them. We just do them. Well, there's an unconscious intention that is compelling that. And that's why we can pull that into consciousness, find out what that is, and find a different, better habit for that outlet. So we're always trying to fulfill intentions. And so if we start there and we say, okay, well, we're trying to live, I'm trying to live a fulfilling life. Now, are my strategies to do that, are they working? Okay. So I want to check in. Are you both understanding where I'm going with this? I just want to check in.
I think so. You look at it as a
I'm
bigger
reframing the
picture.
problem. In what way do
Yeah.
you think I'm reframing the problem?
You go at what does everyone ultimately want, which is pretty much the biggest problem we can tackle.
Mhm.
And I think you're going to go next to how we are going to get there. And you already covered different ways people believe fulfillment means to them.
The problem is also in the way that we use language. A problem sounds like a thing, and my destination sounds like a thing, and who I am right now, which is not where I want to be, sound like a thing. And none of these things are things. They're all processes.
Mm.
And when you can begin to think of things this way, it makes you a lot more flexible, makes you a lot more adaptable, and it makes change a lot easier. Because when you say, okay, here's the fulfilling life I want to live, let me check on the strategies that I'm employing to get there. And then I go, okay, that's not working. Well, then I just need to change a strategy. And that's a lot easier than saying I have a problem that's standing in my way. And it sounds like, something like a rock or something, or a wall. And that's just not true. It's a problem is it has to do with the perception of it.
In what you're saying is, if everyone is moving towards fulfillment and most people are focused on the wrong problem, even though their desire is to have fulfillment.
Right. So if you're just trying to solve problems because you're in reaction mode,
Mhm.
and something presents a problem, maybe it's I don't know, a bill that was unexpected, and you're on a tight budget or something like that. We go in that sort of defense reaction mode where we're just trying to solve the problems day to day.
Mhm.
And then we never really understand, well, where are we trying to get to with this? Am I
Yeah.
just trying to survive, or do I want to thrive? And if I can understand overall that I want fulfillment, even if that's a mystery to me, and it should be, I feel like my fulfillment's still a mystery to me, because there's I'm doing things that are fulfilling right now in my life, and I'm more fulfilled than I've ever been. But what I also know is that I have a lot more potential to be fulfilled. And that mystery is very intriguing. It's motivating. It's very compelling. And I want to know where does that take me? But I still see it in terms of a process. So if we can start there and allow the unknowns and the uncertainties around what a fulfilling life would be like for you, then we can really start to take a step back and say, okay, what is getting in my way? What is a distraction more than it is a bridge that I'm building to get there, or a strategy to get me there? And so then we can look past those sort of small problems that are popping up in day-to-day life that we feel like we must drop everything and solve right then and there. And we can see past them and say, okay, that is either a problem I can set aside for another time to solve, or I can outframe that problem. And that was what ultimately the solution is. I feel like to being too distracted by the smaller problems is to outframe that problem with a greater context. And that greater context is your fulfillment. So is if I stop everything to solve this problem, does that bring me closer to that fulfillment that I'm looking for? Or is it just my sort of obsessive compulsive, I must solve this problem because it's right in front of me?
Well,
And now you have choice and you have space.
well, to each individual, those problems seem so personal and so sometimes threatening, and whether it be emotionally or otherwise, and based off of their own belief system. How would if someone's saying, "Hey, that's easy for you to say, Damon," how would you guide them through navigating that situation?
It's not difficult. I think the difficulty is we want to set certain path in front of us.
Mhm.
And I
Mhm.
also think that when we tackle a problem that we know we can solve and that's small, we're selling ourselves short. We're not really tapping into our potential. I'll give you an example. When I was living in Los Angeles, there was a woman I don't remember what country she was from, but she was from Northern Europe, one of the Northern European countries. And she was very, very attractive. And anytime she was around, the conversation would end up turning toward her sexual frustration. And everybody in that conversation would look at her and be like, "What?" Like, this is not a woman who would seem like this is a problem for her. And, and finally, I even said that to her. I was like, "You're a very attractive woman. Like, you could pretty much get any guy you want. What is this about?" And she would, and it seemed like a chronic problem because she would always bring it up. And this is like over a period of months. And she was like, "Well, I don't want to just go with anybody." And I was like, "Well, I'm not suggesting that you should, but if you're that sexually frustrated, like, uh, there's a people who, either their personalities or even physically, they're not very attractive. And so they have that challenge to overcome. And even they overcome it and they find sexual satisfaction. And the more I was around her and the more she would bring this problem up, the more I realized that she was using this as a way to not face the bigger problems in her life. And she seemed very single dimensional. She didn't seem like she had, a fully formed personality because she wouldn't allow herself to go that far. She wouldn't allow herself to open up and talk about who she really was. Everything had to get passed through this problem of her sexual frustration. I think it also gave her a lot of attention because she knew that when she would say that, and she was quite attractive, it put a lot of attention on her. All the guys would look at her, even some of the women would just be like, "What?" And so it just gave her that extra attention. But it became so obvious to me that she was using this to not tackle her bigger problems, and not even that there were problems, but facing the real stuff in life. And I think that that's a kind of an extreme example, but I think a lot of us are doing that. And what we need to do is focus on, well, what is that fulfilling life? And is this really even a problem that really is important for me to solve right now? And what it'll do is it'll shine a light on a lot of these things that you think are very, very important or you think are obstacles, and you realize they're really not. And so in some cases, it kind of solves those problems. Also, I want to say too, in the business context, James Wedmore, who's a great teacher, entrepreneur, I learned a lot from him when it came to the business that I had created. He said, if you want to make money, solve problems. that people want to solve, and you help them solve that, and that's how you make money. And if you want to make more money, he just said solve bigger problems.
Mm.
And so that is so applicable in business. It's also applicable in life. If you want greater reward, if you want greater fulfillment in your life, solve bigger problems. And then it brings us our attention to accomplishing and the idea of getting somewhere. And so I think that can help contextualize this thing. What do you want to accomplish and where do you want to be? But the problem is that the accomplishment itself and the destination itself is not that fulfilling. And we put our attention there thinking that when I accomplish this thing, glory is just going to rain down on me and fulfillment's going to rain down on me, like as if I suddenly turn a corner and it all just works out. It's like I have never accomplished anything that worked that way. Of course, I've been excited and had, happiness and things like that as a result of an accomplishment, but it's very, very fleeting. It's really what was that journey that got you there? And the journey's not over. I don't know, Nate, you've accomplished some pretty big things in your life. I don't know about you, but oftentimes if I accomplish something big, there's a little bit of sadness that I experience because it feels like something is over, something has ended.
Sure.
And that can feel very empty too. And I
Sure.
acknowledge the feeling and accept it. But what gets me up the next morning and going again is realizing, well, it was kind of silly to think that there was some sort of finality in that the
Right.
journey is not over. The journey continues. It's like when you see a movie and it's epic, and one of the movies that comes to mind is like the first Rocky or the first Matrix. And then you feel like there's such finality in the end of those movies, but then they give you a hint of something more, and then you go, okay, well then you go and watch the sequel, and it's like, okay, we have a whole new set of problems to solve. It's like that's such like what life is like.
But I think it's important to keep in mind the final destination that you want to have, because otherwise you cannot just enjoy your process of transformation without knowing where you're heading.
Well, that's what I mean by contextualizing it. I mean,
Mm.
you need to have that context in which you're solving the problems, but I don't think a lot of people think about that. They just think about the accomplishment, or they just think about the destination. They don't think of it in terms of how does this get me closer to a more fulfilling and more rewarding life.
Sure. And I think sometimes there's the expectation that once this problem is solved, the suffering that they're experiencing will go away. When in reality, wherever we go, there we are. And so I think that's the critical nature of doing the change work first and becoming the kind of person that can. Can you speak a little bit to that?
And becoming the person who can?
Yeah, I mean, I'm becoming over getting, or
All right, I'll go about this kind of sideways because it's just on my mind. I recently saw a documentary about Brett Butler, and I was never a fan of hers. Not I didn't dislike her, but like her comedy or whatever, it just didn't pull me in. I never watched the TV show that she was on, but I also had no idea that she completely collapsed into drug abuse and lost her career based on that. I didn't know any of those things, and I talk about this a lot, that by those measurements that we sort of intuit or presuppose about what's going to make us happy and what's going to make us fulfilling, and we base that a lot on just accomplishing and getting somewhere, like we've been talking about. If as a celebrity, if that's not there, I don't know what is then. If you're attractive, which most celebrities are, if you're wealthy, which most celebrities are, and you have influence, which most celebrities have, and you have all that, and you destroy it because of an addiction or some of the problems that you're experiencing. One of the things she said, and I thought this was really amazing, she went from being $100,000 a year comic to a multimillionaire per year because of her TV show. But because she didn't perceive herself that way, and she still perceived herself as a $100,000 a year comic, she found a way to lose all of that extra money that she was making. So this idea that, when I get there, when I accomplish X amount of things and I'm there, then all these problems get solved. I'm happy. I'm fulfilled. It's like if celebrities who destroy their lives, from their success. It's their success that enables them to destroy their lives.
Maybe that's why people have fear of success.
I don't know if we should even get started on that one, on this. But if that's not there, if being beautiful, wealthy, celebrated, influential, if that's not there, then what is the there that you're looking for? So yeah, and I think people who, that's the whole be careful what you wish for, it might come true. I think that's where a lot of celebrities end up. They get everything that they wanted, and some people are very good at doing this. Some people are very good at making these things happen and accomplishing a lot of things. And then they get there and they go, wait a minute, this didn't solve what I thought it was going to solve. And that makes them feel sad and empty. And whatever problems they had before, well, they just took them right into this situation. They didn't resolve them because money's not going to solve all of those problems, especially the internal ones. And so the celebrity, the fame, the money just gives them greater access to destroy themselves faster. And, not everybody becomes that successful. They may have all the same problems, but those same problems just kind of sit inside of them and never get resolved, but they are able to hold it at bay. Well, you throw $10 million on that problem, and now you've got a problem that's $10 million bigger, because now you have greater access to all the things that can destroy you. So did I answer your question?
Well, earlier you were talking about focusing on small problems, and most people missing the fact that they're really searching for fulfillment. And so I thought it would it's and fulfillment is in relationship to who you are, right? Would you say that's correct? Or, as far
Sure.
as
You can't separate the two. Yeah.
Right. And so it's like, so to me, it's a really interesting, I was really wanting to get your take on, becoming, versus getting, and how you see those two things individually. And because so many people are so focused on getting, right, that they might either, they can't sustain it, or when they get there, there's a huge letdown because they bring all of their problems with them, that kind of thing. And so I was just curious on really your your approach to things,
Yeah, well, you can never go wrong with aligning with your values and having a clear distinction between your own personal values versus external values or society's values or culture's values. And that's why I think fame is so important to people. And people will say, well, that's not important to me. And it's like, there's so many people say that they're just flat out lying. When I went to LA, when I moved to LA, 1/3 of the people would tell you, yes, I want to be a famous actor. The other third would kind of grunt and groan about it, and then, eventually admit it to you. And then the other third were just lying. Like, it's what they all wanted. It's what you go there for. Like, my insurance agent had, written scripts and had headshots ready to go in case somebody, recognized him and he could give, his headshots. Like, everybody, the janitor, at a building or whatever, they all have it. That's what they all want. And so I think that's a really good one to look at. And it's because it's put in our face in our culture so much that this is the height of everything, beauty, wealth, all the things that, we look at, and that's why they're called celebrities. We celebrate that. And so it's so hard to not be affected by that. So the best thing you can do with that is understand what that thing is, and then also understand separately what your own personal values are and how do you fulfill your personal values. And the more you line up with that and are actively engaged in that, you will build things, you will accomplish things, and you can enjoy that process and be fulfilled and experience the rewards, not just when you accomplish it and it's over and you reach the destination, but every step of the way. And what starts to happen is you start to really recognize that that's the important part. The important part is the doing. Now, speaking of celebrity, I had no idea we are going to talk so much about celebrity, but one of the things I did hear a celebrity say, Val Kilmer, in his wonderful documentary, is a recent documentary. I didn't know much about him on a personal level until I watched that documentary. And one of the things he said was when he got out of Juilliard, I think it was, he went after the roles that he thought, the acting roles that he thought would transform him. And I thought, wow, what an amazing approach. And he didn't say, but I'm assuming he had a sense of who he wanted to transform into, and it probably had a lot to do with, how great of an actor or what level he wanted to reach.
Mhm.
But what a way to look at that. And so what if instead of approaching your goals based on that kind of fantasy you have in your mind that, once you have the money and all the things that come with accomplishing the goal, that's going to, solve your problems and give you the fulfillment that you want. What if you look at your goals and you say, okay, which goals will transform me? Now, that's a different question. That changes everything. And then you could say, well, what do I want to transform it into? And from the 10-mile viewpoint, you can say transform you into a fulfilled person who's living a fulfilling life. You can start there, and then you can work backwards and find what are those details, what are those goals. But think in terms of that. I mean, just even saying that really inspires me, and I do come back to that periodically when I'm working on something. What are the projects that I could create that will transform me? Writing a book, making certain videos, going to different conferences that where some of the big hitters are, and what would that be like? Reaching out to people who I find interesting, who are way above my league, and as far as fame. What if I reach out to them and ask for an interview? And if they say no, that's fine. But what happens if they say yes?
Mhm.
Who are the people I could interview that might even transform me while having that discussion? Like when I think about it like that, I mean, I kind of get goosebumps thinking about it. And I just think that's just a much better approach. But I think some people are afraid of that because they don't really want to change. They don't really want to transform. They don't think about it like that. They just think in terms of, well, what I want, the destination and the accomplishment. And that I think is just a dead end. I just don't think that it gets you there. I think it's far better to focus on becoming and doing and learning and transforming than it is in accomplishing and arriving at a destination.
But why do you think people get lost in uh, um, in that search for what they want?
I think because we don't change isn't really uncomfortable. Transformation is like takes that to another level. I think we were always afraid of who we might become in the process of change or transformation. There's a lot of unknowns there, and it's scary. And a lot of people say change is hard and change is difficult, and I've said that many times myself. But I'm beginning to think that that's not really the hard part about change and transformation. It's the resisting the change and the transformation. We're changing, we're transforming. It's not like we even have a choice about it.
Sure.
It's the resistance to that makes it painful. But if we embraced it and we just said, okay, yeah, this is happening, um, it would be much easier and we would be more fulfilled. And when you think about like I remember hearing Richard Bandler, someone asked him what's the biggest transformation a person can experience, or what's the biggest transformation a person experiences in their lifetime, and he says, birth. I was like, yeah, okay. And birth, they even say for, babies is kind of a traumatic thing coming out of
Mhm.
the birth canal. And he said, and then they asked, well, what's the second one? And he said, death. And it's like, wow, okay, yeah, he just kind of nailed it. And so those are the greatest transformations that we experience. And we're too little as babies to fear that. We don't know what's going on. But when we're getting close to death, like that's a really scary thing. I mean, I'm amazed at how many people just do not accept their mortality. If you ask them and you say, are you going to die someday? Everybody says, well, of course, yes. But when I started selling life insurance, that's when I started to realize how much people, if you bring that up, they're out of there. Like they don't want to talk to you. And it was funny. I have a therapist who I see periodically because I've just been going to him for years, and he's really good. He's more like a coach to me, and he needed some life insurance as well. And he was like, I got to be honest. And he knew that I used to sell insurance. And he's like, I got to be honest. I'm really struggling with this. And before he said anything more, I said, it's the mortality issue, isn't it? And he's like, yeah. And I was like, well, and it's kind of funny. I mean, this guy's a therapist. He's a really good therapist. He's a little bit older than me. And yet he still has not really fully accepted that. And it's like, not only, so I'll say this, but and I'm not the first to say it, because even Marcus Aurelius from 2,000 years ago was saying this, that to truly live is to truly accept your death and accept that finality. And when you do that, you're really free to live. I mean, it's really, really true. And
You know,
change, I just want to say one more thing. Change is not as hard when you think about it like that. You know what? We're all going to die someday. So embrace the change.
yeah, well, what you mentioned about being it difficult to change, I find it so interesting that even with the smallest thing in my life, I have resistance. I was just remembering now whenever I switched my laptop. I had an old laptop, I was quite attached to it. It was a Windows. And then I thought, you know what, I'm going to switch to Apple. And I made the decision and I knew I'm going to make the change. But when it came time to actually take action, buy the new one and let the other one go, I had so much resistance, almost as if I'm not going to go to something better. It's so strange that I've noted this with small things like this. What does it really matter? Like, it's not such a big deal. But it's interesting to see that resistance coming up in small things. And then, obviously, when you think about real transformation, how much more that resistance is going to be, in direct proportion to the size of the transformation you're going to make.
And now a word from our sponsor, Apple Products. No, I'm joking. Yeah, it is amazing how much we resist even the smallest changes. And so when we think of it like an actual transformation, I know that I struggled a long time with money issues. And one of my internal beliefs was that if I became successful financially in the way that I wanted to, that I was going to become greedy. And like that was just hidden in there somewhere. And I think that a lot of our transformations don't happen, or we resist them because we do have some of these deeply held beliefs of what if I become this person, then what are the negative side effects, the negative consequences that could happen.
But what if instead we focus on, I'm just going to get there and whatever problem I face, I'm going to figure it out then?
I think that's a healthy attitude. I think also too is to, and this goes, I mean, I've already brought up Marcus Aurelius, so his saying of when you encounter an obstacle, the obstacle becomes the way, and it's sort of embracing it that way. It's like the destination is not really what this is all about. It's the journey. And I know that sounds really, really cliche, but you can meditate on that and go very, very deep with that. The obstacle is necessary and part of the journey. We tend to want to just go, oh, I have an obstacle in front of me, I just want to jump past it. Or there's also where resentment can set in, and you just go, okay, well, I'm not going to do this anymore, or and like you're rebelling against something. It's really just yourself, but it can feel like that's an old childish habit to say, well, I'm just not going to engage, or I'm just not going to do it. But no,
that problem that you mentioned with not feeling like you can make more money because you're afraid you're going to be greedy. It's so interesting that you put yourself as in, I'm not greedy right now and I do not have the money, but I'm trying to solve the problem of what if I become greedy right now before you even get there. And I feel like if you would have just changed the focus and be like, you know what, I'm just going to make more money. And when I will start to be greedy, that's when I will solve that limiting belief. Didn't you see that as a possibility? As, you know what, even if I become greedy, I will figure it out at that point, and allow yourself to, go through that limiting belief and fulfill it and then solve the problem.
Well, that presupposes that I was approaching this in a very logical and rational way, which most of us are not. So the other thing too is it was an unconscious belief. I didn't know that was in there. And the whole idea of NLP, Neuro Linguistic Programming, is to take those unconscious processes and bring them into consciousness. And when I say processes, a belief is a process. Take that into consciousness, and then when you realize what it is, sometimes just the realization of what it is, you go, what? Like this was what was stopping me? Really?
So our unconscious is not logical? Your unconscious could not say, you know what? Yeah, we will become greedy when we have more money, but let's just roll with it. Your unconscious did not let you pass it?
Have you ever heard of the metaphor of the conscious and the unconscious is like a horse and a rider?
No.
The rider is the conscious mind who thinks he's in control of everything, but really the horse has more control, but they also need to be guided and led, right? The horse can't think on the level that the rider can think, but the rider can't do what the horse does. And so the two need to sync up together and work together. And that's what, a big chunk of what NLP is about. So no, your unconscious is more like a child. It does not know what you want and what you don't want. It only knows what you're shining the light on. That's why I focus so much, or I teach so much to focus on what it is you want rather than what the problems and also what you don't want. Most people don't know what they want because they are so focused on what they don't want, what they're trying to avoid.
Isn't it interesting how our unconscious sometimes is just staying in our way? As if,
Well,
come on.
but so that's it. So I want to clear that up too, because I think some people are very adversarial. They think of their unconscious in a very adversarial way, and it's like the unconscious is just doing the job you gave it.
Mm.
And some of those jobs you gave it when you were 5 years old, and you forgot that.
You didn't upgrade the system.
Didn't upgrade the system, and so your unconscious is just carrying out the orders you gave it. And so taking an adversarial role with your unconscious is not the answer. You're just going to end up fighting yourself, hating yourself, and that's where all that stuff about like fear of success comes in, or fear of sabotaging myself. And I've had clients come to me and just say like, well, yeah, I got this part of me that just sabotages me, and I just want to destroy it. Like it's like, okay, you're talking about destroying a part of yourself. This is not the way to do this. So it's about taking on a more friendly, at least to start with, and a more integrative attitude when it comes to your unconscious. It's valid to not want to be greedy, right? And what I had to do was have that conversation with myself when it came to being successful with money, and say, okay, I can be more generous if I'm more successful. That part likes that a lot, but the part was still skeptical. So then I had to say, okay, would you play a role in my journey to become more successful financially, and be there to make sure that I don't become greedy and that I remain generous? And that part was like, sign me up. Like that's all I wanted. It just wanted to be a part of the whole. And that's all your resistant parts want. They just want to be part of the whole.
It's so interesting that you talk about yourself as having a conversation with someone else, but it's actually still yourself. But it's like a dialogue with, I asked the part and the part said yes or no, but it's you asking yourself.
Absolutely. I don't know of any other better way to do that. I mean, that's sure. I'm not saying that's the only way, but I like to talk. I like to put things into words. So yeah, I have a conversation with myself, and when I'm coaching people, I'm having that conversation with the person, and I'm working them through these you can call them blocks or limitations, and that's how we do it. So I don't really know of any other effective way to do it. I'm not saying there's not one, but that's the way that I know how to do it. So the other thing I want to mention too is, and it falls right in line with what we're talking about, and I think a lot of young people feel this, and I'm thankfully around the age of 40, I started to let go of this, and it was the need to prove myself. And that comes out in so many different ways. It's like, prove myself to what? Well, prove myself to myself. Prove myself to myself for what? That I exist. I know that I exist. The fact that I'm even having this conversation with myself means that I exist. So who am I trying to prove myself to? And given every context was maybe something different. And I also found that for a long time, I was still trying to prove myself to my parents. I couldn't believe how long I dragged that around, even though I did things that were quite the opposite of what they wanted me to do. But unconsciously, there was still a lot of that in there. Do you have something to add to that, Nate?
No, I just didn't expect you to say that. That's all. Or just from what I know about you, personally, I didn't. How did you uncover that? How did you know that was the case?
It wasn't like a huge revelation. It would just be from time to time asking myself, why am I doing this? And having I did want kids. I wanted a family, and I wanted a business. So those were definitely things that I wanted. But I found myself, doing insurance. Like that was part of that was wanting to prove something to my parents that I could do this. And, it wasn't really me. It was, what my father did. So that had some of it in there. But yeah, there were times where I could catch myself, when I get honest with myself and say, well, what's really behind this? And it was like, well, I'm trying to prove myself. Well, who am I trying to prove myself to? And sometimes it was my parents. Sometimes it was myself. Sometimes it was to like the first girlfriend I had. It was just strange things. You have all this stuff kind of hanging out in your unconscious that if left alone and isolated, doesn't upgrade, doesn't evolve. And so you have to go in there and shine a light on those things, bring it into consciousness. And
Mhm.
finally, like I said, a lot of these things you just look at and you go, okay, that's crazy. Like, why would I? And you don't even have to do much more work than that. And that's why, when we're talking about like at the beginning of psychotherapy and the origins of it,
Mhm.
that's basically what Sigmund Freud would do a lot of. It was, they called it a talk therapy, because if you could just bring these things out in the open, because during those times, the Victorian era, you just didn't talk about these things. You didn't talk about problems. You didn't talk about feelings. You didn't talk about sex and all these things. And here was Freud saying, well, no, let's talk about all those things. And so if you had an outlet for the first time in your life to talk about those things, and you could do it an hour a week for a year or 2 years, there's going to be some evolving that's happening there.
Sure.
And so sometimes it's just a matter of bringing it out into the open, but then sometimes you bring it out into the open and there's still something that's got its hook in there, and that's whenever an intervention needs to happen. And I don't mean like your entire family and friends show up to your house. I mean like, like a process or a technique that needs to be done so that you can do that upgrade.
Do you
Sure.
think that there is some positivity in that need to prove yourself? As in, sometimes it may push you to challenge yourself and you do something and it's really helping you grow. I know that it's probably not the best place to come from, but sometimes it can be positive. And I'm thinking of past experiences I've had in my life where, yeah, I wanted to prove myself and I could see that it didn't go in the right direction. So I stopped because I realized it's only what I want. It's just proving to myself. But then other times when it had both combination, both of it's really something I want, and at the same time I also want to prove myself that I can do it, and it turned out well. So would you say there isn't any positivity in proving yourself?
So I think there is, and I think it really ties back into the title of this that we're doing. And it's sometimes you have to either meet yourself where you are or meet the person where they are to communicate the message. And sometimes you get, and this is like the beginning of any hero's journey.
Mm.
You get pulled into making a change, making a new choice, going past the point of no return based on something that you will eventually fail at. And in the failure of that, you realize a new possibility, you discover yourself deeper, and you tap into a new potential. So if the idea of proving yourself gets you off the couch and gets you going, and then along that journey, you realize something deeper, more profound, you tap into your potential, and you eventually realize it's really not about proving yourself because there's nothing to prove.
Hmm.
I'm not going to argue with that. Like
Hmm.
that's a great thing, and I'd have to say that that's where most of us start. And in trying to communicate a lot of the lessons that I've learned, or what I've learned from a lot of the lessons that I've learned, a lot of the failures that I've had, and when I came across self-concept and I was like ready to run out, down the street yelling at everybody, especially if you were in personal development, hey, this thing has been discovered. We know how to do this. We know how to create ourselves in such a way that makes us perpetually fulfilled and seeking more and more fulfillment. This is the crowning achievement of personal development because it is the reason why we develop ourselves. And everybody else was just kind of like, okay, yeah, cool. And what it was is well, not only could they not hear that message at that time, and I know I wouldn't have been able to hear that message early on in my journey. Not only did they not hear that message, it when it came out of me, it sounded just like what everybody else was saying in personal development.
Yeah.
So you really have to meet people where they are, and I think part of what I'm trying to accomplish just in this conversation here, and for people who are listening, is exactly that. Like, where are you in this journey, and how can I deliver a message to you that meets you where you are, gets you on the journey, and get you on board with, hey, I've got some stuff to share with you that I think will help you in that journey tremendously, stuff that I wish I had. But a lot of people can't hear that because it's not where they are. When I started my NLP journey, if I had encountered Steve Andreas and he said, here's my self-concept model, go learn it, it's going to change your life, I would have been like, okay, old man, whatever, and probably, would gravitated to the younger trainers who were doing all the persuasion and influence stuff, because that's a lot of what was very attractive to me at the beginning. But after years of doing NLP training and taking all of the models I had learned and stretching them to their limitations. And a lot of these models did have limitations because a lot of them weren't really NLP based. There was a lot of what we call content imposed on them. I'm not going to get into that. It's a long conversation, but it created a lot of limitations for them. And so I would take these models to their limits, and then I was like, okay, I'm not getting anything more out of this. I'm not evolving further. I'm not tapping into my potential. What's going on here? And the response I got from my teachers at that time was, well, just keep practicing. And I was like, okay, well, nothing's happening. And then Steve entered my life. And I said, okay, Steve, this is where I'm having a problem. This is where I'm having a problem. He goes, okay, well, you were taught wrong. And at first I resisted that. I was like, how dare you? I spent many thousands of dollars learning this stuff. It can't be wrong. And he didn't care how much money I had spent. He was just like, nope, that's wrong. And I'll show you how it's wrong. And sure enough, he was right. And I was just like, okay. And then I pounded him on questions and this and that and trying to figure things out. And that's when he finally goes, oh, I think I know what you want. And I was like, good, because I don't know. I know all I know that there's something I'm seeking. And then he puts this in my hands, the self-concept model. And it was just like, this was it. This is what answered those things. But I had to get to that point to finally recognize what was in front of me and then use it. And then I went out, trying to communicate that to everyone else, and then they just couldn't hear it. And that's when I was like, I don't get it. But if you're not ready to hear that message, then it's going to fall on deaf ears. And I was no exception to that. I couldn't have heard that early on. It wouldn't have spoken to me. And so it took a while of looking for answers and not finding them. And you look in every direction until you kind of throw your hands up in the air. And that's an excellent time to consult a good mentor or a good teacher. And then they can sort of show you, they can't do it for you, but they can show you the door, or they can, shine the light in that direction. And that's all Steve did for me. And he was just impressed that I actually did it. 'Cause I think he was giving a lot of advice to a lot of people, and they just weren't following through with what he was prescribing. But anytime he gave me something, I would go and do it, to the point where whenever he introduced me to his son, Mark was like, well, my dad says one of the things about you is that you'll actually do the things when, we tell you to do them. And I was like, yeah, doesn't everybody? So I think when it comes to proving yourself, which I think a lot of people are engaged in, because that's how they feel like they're going to solve their self-worth. And it's like, okay, well, that sounds about right. That would be the answer to a self-worth issue. The only problem is that there is no such thing as self-worth. So you're trying to solve a problem with a solution when there really isn't a problem, and the solution is really bad for you, because, or maybe not bad for you, but you can never solve a problem that doesn't exist. So if you're trying to solve a problem in a certain way, you're never going to solve it because it doesn't exist. And so the whole proving yourself, I spent years trying to do that, and it never works because you're trying to prove something that doesn't need proof.
Well, it did work to some extent. I think there's always some positivity coming out of that. You were saying that you wanted a business. You were saying you wanted kids. You got the kids. You got the business. You had to learn a lot from that process. And didn't something good come out of that?
So if the journey to prove myself led me to understand that there is no such thing as proving yourself, then I would say you're correct. But I would have preferred not to have the problem at all. I would have preferred to be working on other stuff than trying to prove myself. But the journey was a journey. I don't have any regrets. It's not like, oh, I wish I could have never had this problem. And it's like, that's just what happened. And I'd say that probably 97, 98, 99% of the entire population suffers from the same thing, because when you're in those early developmental years, I mean, I'm talking early, like 3 or 4, you don't really know what's real and who you are and how much of your parents are actually part of you and not part of you and all those things. And so when that idea at a certain point, and it happens to most of us at some point, it doesn't matter how good of a household you had, doesn't matter how great of parents you had, at some point, this idea often enters your little brain that the love that you thought was so unconditional might have conditions on it, and you might have to earn it. And when that idea enters into the little child's mind, then that is the beginning of the issue of self-worth. And you looked at me funny.
What makes someone feel that? I never felt that way.
Well, I would say you don't know that, first of all. Secondly, I do know that you engage in self-worth. I don't know.
No, I'm talking about unconditional love. Why didn't you say something like every kid is going to go through that at some point? Feel unconditional love? Feel that the love is conditioned?
Yes.
And that's when the issue of proving yourself comes from. I definitely wanted to prove myself in certain things, but I never felt like I don't have the love of my parents unconditionally. The two things were not connected for me, so I wouldn't generalize it for everyone.
So when you think about, let's not use something present. Let's use something. Can you remember a time when you were a kid and you wanted to prove yourself?
Yes.
Okay. And what was important to you in proving yourself?
So that I can feel smart and intelligent and show myself and others that I can do it too.
And if you could show yourself and others that you could do that, what was that going to do for you?
I would feel smart and intelligent.
There's more to it than that. It goes beyond that. And
appreciated by others more.
Yes. You thought that you could earn more love if you were worth more.
Not love, appreciation. Because it was not related to
deeper
love.
than appreciation? I mean,
I didn't want people to love me because of succeeding at something. I just wanted to be more like, oh, wow, she's smart. Like, you appreciate a business person that's very smart and has a successful business. You don't love them, but you appreciate them. So it was that type of appreciation that I was chasing.
So if you scratch the surface of wanting appreciation, wanting attention, eventually it leads to love. I
did not want unconditional love from my colleagues in high school. It was a situation involving them. And yeah, it was just about appreciation and show, yeah, I'm cool too. I'm smart as well and I can do it.
So you wanted to fit in?
Maybe.
And why do we want to belong and why do we want to fit in?
Well, I was already belonging and fitting in. I just wanted to show that I can handle that too. I can handle that challenge as well. I can be smart or smarter as well.
So it might be a little bit different when you go to the tribe. This is what you're talking about. And it's very important for us to belong and feel like we fit into the tribe. And I do think that that's linked back to love. But when it comes to your parents, I agree with you. Your parents are very loving, and I wouldn't assume that either one of them would put conditions on their love for you. Maybe for your brother, but not for you. But it's the idea that you could earn more too. And it's like, if love is unconditional, then there's no earning more or less. But what happens is, it's not usually a parent intentionally doing this, but if you've ever been compared, like your parents compare you to the neighbor's kid, or your brother who made better grades or something like that, when you get compared, that isn't a parent unintentionally putting this idea of there's higher and less, there's more and less value, there's higher worth and there's less worth. And it starts to put that idea into the kid's head that this love that I thought was conditional, that I kind of took for granted, may now be conditional. And
not necessarily. I don't understand why you jump from, you want that comparison to being loved. The parents may still love the kid just as well if they are dumb and don't get good grades.
Well, I think the parents do, but the child doesn't know that. The child is compared, or when a child...
Well, that's the thing. Do you think every single child is going to interpret that as they don't love me anymore?
No, not that far. That there are variations in love, or the love can be taken away.
I never associated, whenever my parents compare me, I never associated that particular comparison with love. It was like, yeah, it's a comparison, but it's not attached to it's this comparison. They want me to do this thing much better. They want us to do this better, but I never thought of it. For example, my parents are more religious than my brother and I. And whenever we started to become older, we didn't want to go to church as much. And I remember my father used to say, well, see that kid, I always see them at the church. Okay, fine. But I never felt like my father, I never made any connection to that comparison and how much he actually loves me.
Okay, so some things are going to roll right off of you. You're going to be compared, or it doesn't always have to be about comparison. It could just be, it could even just be being punished for something, and it's just when the thought enters the mind, at a very young age, wait a minute, this love that has just been seemingly unconditional, because I don't know any different, the idea that it can be taken away from me, or it can be lowered, or I can earn more and I'll get more of it. Like at a certain point, that will enter into a kid's mind, the concept of that. I remember when, I forget how old my daughter was, she was probably like 3, and she was talking about different cartoons that she liked. And I said, well, which one do you like better? And she couldn't conceptualize that. She's like, well, Dad, I like both of them. And I said, well, which one do you like better? And she just would go, she was too, at a certain age, you're too young to understand that concept.
Mm-hmm.
And then you finally do, that there are things that you perceive as being better or worse. And then you start to understand that other people think that way too. And other people think that way about you. And so then you start entering into that whole idea of, well, how much am I worth? Am I worthy of being loved? And if I'm worthy of being loved, then how much? And then what do I have to do to get more? And so I know for a fact, knowing you, I'm not trying to expose you here, that you do engage in that to some extent.
I don't see that it's connected to love. That's
Well,
what I don't agree with.
I think most of this stuff it goes back to love, but it could be something else. But it doesn't matter. It's about worth. It's more about worth, and usually the worthiness that we feel is when we feel loved completely, wholly, without the fear of it being taken away, which is really just accessing your own love. Then the whole idea of worthiness just goes away. It just burns out. But it might not be love specifically, but it could be about other things.
Mm-hmm.
Nate, you've been really quiet. He's like, I'm just gonna sit back and watch them fight.
I think it's really valuable to press against ideas and to explore them that way. Really.
Yeah. So anyway, I mean, the main point I want to get across is that whatever arbitrary proofs you're looking to validate yourself are just that, arbitrary, and they prove nothing. And I think a lot of people can hear that right now and say, I agree with that consciously, but unconsciously they don't. And that's where the work comes in. So I can tell you that, and you can hear that, but it doesn't mean it's necessarily going to change everything for you. But what it can do, it's dropping a seed in there. And so, like, I remember when I first started getting interested in non-duality, one of the things that really interested me in non-duality is finally dissolving my suffering and I started to understand that the more I perceived myself as a separate self, the more suffering I was going to experience. Well, when you perceive yourself as a separate self from everything else that's going on around you, that's also something that fosters the idea of worth and self-worth and that whole thing. But if you can dissolve that and see that everything is one, that suffering goes away. Now, I haven't reached enlightenment, but what I do know is I can intellectually grasp that really that this is kind of just one block of reality and I'm just part of it and there really isn't a separate self. I can grasp that intellectually and know that when I feel self-conscious, I'm engaging that separation. And that's never going to help me. It's always going to make me feel less confident, less fulfilled, more divided. And so if I'm feeling self-conscious, I go, oh, well, that's because I'm engaging in the false separation between me and everything else. And just by knowing that, I can say, okay, well, let's walk that back. Let's try a different approach. So for those of you listening and hearing all these things, and I know it might sound like we're talking about the promised land and when you transform and all those things, you're already in a sense there. It's just certain processes, especially the unconscious ones, haven't caught up to that yet. And they may never catch up to them if you don't do the work. And when you do the work, then, you're on that journey. And at some point, I don't want to give it a destination because I don't want to say you'll catch up to it because wouldn't even say that for myself. But at least you're in the process. You're in the transformation and it's ongoing. And as long as you see it as more of a process than a destination, you're going to get so much more fulfillment out of that. And you'll be a lot less self-conscious. You won't engage in the whole idea of self-worth. Eventually that will burn out. And when it does, wow, like the suffering that I released from myself by just letting go of that one concept was tremendous. And I clung to that concept. And why, I mean, I could explore all the reasons why. I don't know, but it's something we all do because we want to know that we are valid beings who are worthy. And if I let go of that idea, then maybe I'll discover, that I'm completely unworthy or worthless. And that is kind of the truth. That is kind of the scary truth, that because there is no such thing as self-worth, that, yeah, there's kind of like you're discover that you really don't have any worth. But what you do see, and it's so clear when this happens, is your own value is in what you value. And so your own purpose is that purpose that you create, and it's not something you manufacture from your conscious mind. It's when all these things align that you really tap into that, and your purpose sort of creates itself from within. Your value creates itself from within. You don't look externally to validate that anymore. And to me, that's been the freedom from suffering that has really changed everything for me, and what I would try to teach as much as possible, and try to formulate my message as much as possible to people, to reach people where they're at.
Makes a lot of sense.
All right, I think we covered it all, huh? Not all. It's really a discussion that you can have indefinitely, and I've had long discussions with people, and it's really awesome to talk to people who have different perspectives on this, because it's it's all pieces of the puzzle. All right, well, let's wrap this up. Any final words? No, you guys are just ready to go eat lunch or something, huh?
I really appreciate you sharing your experience. I know that after working with so many different self concepts, there's some unique perspectives that you have as far as transformation. So thanks for sharing.
My pleasure. If it can help anyone, even if it just gives them a little bit of light, a little bit of a North Star, that's what really does it for me. Being able to teach someone something so that they don't have to struggle and suffer as much.
Yeah.
And but if you are struggling and you are suffering, transform it, use it. Anger, it does no good to stay angry. Transform it, use it, harness it. It's very powerful when you do. The same thing for any other type of suffering. Instead of just sitting there and suffering and hoping it goes away or trying to avoid it, use it. It is the obstacle that becomes the way.